Good afternoon. How's the conference going so far? Isn't it amazing? It's been an amazing day to talk about optimism. There's so much negative going on, so much despair sometimes in the conservation community that we're really happy to bring folks together to talk about what's working in conservation. And so we're really happy you are all here. Today's session, by the way, I'm Dennis Kelly. I'm with the Smithsonian. And it's our honor to have you here to continue a dialogue about what's working in conservation so that we can continue to make progress in the environment that we're in. It's very timely. Today's session, the last session of the afternoon before we go into our evening events, is about positive partnerships. And it's a very diverse group that we're going to be introducing today. Folks from government, from the private sector, from conservation organizations, from organizations that are based in their range country working on their own conservation issues. So we're going to be hearing from a diverse group of people from diverse backgrounds about unique and interesting ways that they're approaching conservation issues and conservation success stories. So without further ado, we're going to start with Dr. Frederic Launay from the Mohamed bin Zayed Species Conservation Fund in Abu Dhabi. So without further ado, Dr. Fred.
Okay, good afternoon, I think. Yeah, we are still in the afternoon. I just landed this morning, and for those who know, I am obviously not Her Excellency Razan al-Mubarak, who could not make it today. She is a new mother, and she could not free herself to come here. But I will stand in a place to show you what we are. That's me. So I'm the Director General of the Mohamed bin Zayed Species Conservation Fund, but I will speak to you in the capacity of the Environment Agency Abu Dhabi, which is a government agency of the Abu Dhabi Emirates, of I think a very interesting and pioneering and groundbreaking project that bring us closer to what we are trying to aspire throughout our career as biologists, but also as people loving nature. And this project is basically the reintroduction of the scimitar oryx in the Republic of Chad, okay, which is sorry for that. Yeah, I'm afraid it would all be messed up there. So this species was extinct in the wild in the 1980s, completely disappeared from all its range for essentially through hunting and persecution around different area and conflict. It is an IUCN species which is categorized as extinct in the wild, only present in captivity. Thanks God, we have a number of scimitar oryx spread throughout the world in different zoological institutions, and those for very different reasons. These animals are not necessarily spectacular display animals. They are usually white with a patch of brown. They don't move much. They are very expressive, but they are very iconic of semi-arid and arid environments throughout the world. And they've got the main characteristic is that fantastic horn there. In the Arabian Peninsula, these species has been very present in captive collections through state gift. People were giving oryx to dignitaries of the Gulf state when these countries started to emerge as world power. So we have collection of between private and government of several thousand oryx. Our environment agency has more than 6,000 oryx in our care. So they are not rare in captivity, but they have never been managed for conservation. They've been managed as private collection or just to show there. Early attempts have been to reintroduce oryx in fenced area in some range state, like Tunisia, Morocco, and other countries like that. But this animal has never been reintroduced in the wild in this former range. When it comes to that, the Abu Dhabi government, inheriting this large collection from the president, decided a number of years ago that it was time for it to bring them back to their home country. As a government, no strings attached. It was purely genuine initiative of bringing an animal back in the wild. The question there is where, how to do it, with whom, and how fast can we do it. So we need to have there a group of people and institutions coming together and able to put aside their difference to actually reach a common goal. When it comes to an animal like oryx, in a place where, and in an environment that for years now have been a bit neglected by a lot of the conservation community. We are not a rainforest. We are not a biodiversity hotspot. It's very difficult to find key specialists. Fortunately, we had 2 or 3 very old conservationists. You have one here, there, a fossilized one, who still believe in the importance of arid and desert ecosystem, okay? And I'd carry the flag nearly single-handedly for years of promoting the conservation of desert environment. So we had these people. We had to use them and work with them and be able to use their enthusiasm and commitment by supporting what they're doing. We also had a choice of where to reintroduce a species like that. And when it comes to oryx, you have the choice in very attracting species, countries: Chad, Mali, Niger, Libya, Sudan, all countries that we love working in. Okay? So after a number of back and forth, it was decided that Chad was probably the most appropriate country to start to initiate this kind of project. A project where you need space, you need very little people in numbers, and you need to have a good partner on the ground from a government point of view. And we were very fortunate to have a very, very good response from the Chadian government at the highest level, directly from the president level. Coming from a Gulf country, from a government side also, it's much easier also to get connection between government. They speak the same language, they've got the same constituency, they know how to not be democratic when they need not to be democratic, so we can move forward. We also had good NGO partner working at different level of the reintroduction project. So the 3 main at that stage were the Environment Agency, the government of Chad, and the Sahara Conservation Fund that Steve Montford is the chair of. And I've been, as I said, really championing the conservation of the oryx and the desert environment for years. We needed also, even if we had a large collection of animals in the wild, in captivity in Abu Dhabi, we needed to rely to as much genetic diversity as we could find to reintroduce. It's one thing to keep animals in captivity, it's completely another to have them able and fit to cope with the wild situation. So maximizing the genetic diversity of a species that we actually know very little. Some of our collection, we don't know where the oryx are coming from. We have no idea. So a huge genetic work has been done in Europe and in the States, as well as in Abu Dhabi, by different organizations, to actually try to maximize the genetic makeup of the oryx that will go. So you have here 7 different AZA and private institutions in the US, Europe and UK, UAE, and you need to host these new World Earth into a dedicated home. So the Abu Dhabi government decided to invest in building a purpose-built capacity facilities to host the World Earth, with a capacity of about 400 animals to be managed there. The aim of this reintroduction also, we wanted to make it a little bit different, is actually to make it at scale. So we are not talking of reintroducing 2, 5, 10 individuals and see what happens. Right from the beginning, we were convinced that we need to be bold. We have a window of opportunity in terms of time, space, and finance that we need to go very fast. So decided that we will bring back at least 500 animals back in Chad. And we wanted from day one to have animals present at every single stage of the project. In Abu Dhabi, in the pre-release condition, stage in Chad on a pre-release place, and in the wild, so that we had all the chains, so that the decision maker and all the partner could actually see right from day one where this oryx will be, and needed to be ready to cope for that. So the Chad government needed to put in place right away patrolling, protected area management, support to the local community, because they had oryx in the wild. We needed to have full-time staff on the pre-release place in Chad, so that also the local population could see that. And we in Abu Dhabi needed to be ready with our facilities to continue feeding that process for many, many, many years. Okay? So it's a long journey. It's over 3,800 kilometers for the oryx. Thankfully, they are not flying United Airlines. So, meaning that when they come on a plane, they stay on a plane. And they arrive in Chad. So we had also a fantastic support from the UAE Army, who provided the transport and the logistic free for the project and committed to provide that for the rest of the project. We had also, in the first instance, the support of the French Legionnaires in Chad, who were there when the plane came, did not know what it was, but helped us with their equipment, with their truck to actually unload the oryx and so on. And so the oryx went back in the wild. We have a big gathering for the first release of oryx there. Oryx are easy. I mean, we as biologists always try to complicate things. The genetic, the veterinarian, the food, the predation, all these kind of things. Some of the species we are dealing with are extremely resilient. They know what they do when they are in the wild. You don't need to teach them. They will do it. They are extremely tough, hardy. They will survive. We sometimes complicate as biologists. We've got too many questions that we need answers from. This guy needs peace, food, and space. You give them that, they'll take care of themselves, no problem. So we have now 75 oryx already in Chad. 50 have been released. And the project started really last year. We already have 10 calves born in the wild, and we've got a number of pregnant females still in the pre-release pen. All the oryx so far are equipped with satellite collar, which means that the team here in the Smithsonian can follow on a daily basis the activities of all the oryx which are released, which give us a mine of data which makes scientists extremely happy. But we can follow and we can see how these animals are actually evolving in their environment. And they are doing very well. So far, no problem. We don't have any mortality of adult. We don't have predation. We don't have mortality. We have both there. We lost some of the calf, 4 so far, which for me is a welcome sign. At least it means that they are back in the ecosystem. The predator have to also get something out of the project, the end of it. But it means that we start to get them back into the ecosystem, and that's also very, very important. But I mean also it's a testing time also for the partnership. And I think when we look partnership for conservation, we need to be ready to be, it's very easy when everything works well. But when you start to have issues, that's where you look at the strength of your partnership and see if all your partners are actually looking for the same thing. So when you start to have predation, you need to glue together. Some people will want to protect the oryx to say, okay, no, hang on a minute. We cannot have predator taking them off or hunting them. So we need to teach them more. We need to protect them. We need to accompany them. Some will say, why don't you shoot all the jackal and predator there? Problem solved. Okay? So we need to be ready to go through that. And that's train a partnership, again, between government and other things, or between biologists. Sometimes we've got completely opposite vision. So it's a constant dialogue and constant reinventing of how we do things. But we need to make sure that at least the end goal we all agree on and be able to trash this issue as they come. So all the collaborating partners so far, as I said, we mentioned the Environment Agency, the government of Chad, the Sahara Conservation Fund, the Smithsonian, the Zoological Society of London, Fossil Rim here in the US, Marwell, which is in the UK, the Royal Zoological Society of Scotland, who did all the genetic work, have all contributed there. But there are also people which are not there, which are all the people surrounding the release site, all the local community now who are participating in the project, and all the decision makers at home or at Chad who are actually making sure that the project is happening. So when it works, it's gone, but it is an ongoing work. We need to always keep at cultivating, maintaining your partnership. The biological aspect, the ecological aspect of the project, we all know more that, and we tend to concentrate all our resources on that aspect. However, the human aspect, how our institutions glue together, is extremely important. And that needs to be maintained, worked at, and really be at the center of the attention, because very often that's what makes a project a long-term success. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Launay. That was an amazing description of a partnership. We had a biologist talking about a partnership with a Gulf States government, an African government, NGOs around the world. Our next speaker represents a very different but very successful type of partnership. He is an engineer. He is working in the Western Hemisphere in Peru, and he is working from the perspective of the energy industry. So please welcome for me Pablo Taborga. So Pablo.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's very, very good to be here. Let me start saying that, the first time I came to Washington, D.C., 30 years ago, when I was a kid, in one of my vacations, I came to see an uncle that was living here. And it was up to me to get to know this fantastic city. There was no internet, so I couldn't Google anything. So I bought a tourist guide. And the very first attraction in my list was the Natural History Museum. So I just went there using the metro for the first time in my life. I am from a very small town in Bolivia, in South America. And I was amazed. Just the atrium, that big elephant that I think is still there. Fantastic. And all the exhibitions. I became in love with science and conservation. The very next day, the next item in my very long to-do list was the National Air and Space Museum. And I discovered another passion that I had was engineering, how to solve really tough problems. And here I am, 30 years later, and going to present and talk about conservation, about science and engineering, and certainly positive partnerships. This very beautiful picture here is a penguin, a Humboldt penguin, listed by IUCN as vulnerable because the loss of their habitat. Really shy animals, but they are very happy. Look at the face, she's smiling. We also have these kind of animals And you know, the picture, I don't know why it's not making justice, but it's a really nice fish. It's called tramboyo in Peru. Really intense eyes. And although not listed in IUCN, basically individuals this size are not common anymore. This is a nice picture of a seabird. It's the Inca tern. Have you seen the power of his eyes, beak, and really nice mustache? Lovely animal. But guess what? It's the party pooper. We have more than 10,000 of these individuals, and they poo everywhere. So it's quite an engineering problem, and we are working with scientists to try to figure out what to do in our marine facilities. Do you guys remember Flipper? Well, this is the South American cousin of Flipper. He's not Flipper. But, you know, he's happy to. They play around our facilities in groups of 10, 20. It's really nice to see these nice animals out there. And you may think, okay, this is Peru, and you have really remote islands in the south of the Pacific. You may think that these pictures were taken in Islas Ballestas, near the Paracas Reserve, where all these animals are certainly there. But no, the pictures that I just showed you were taken here, in our marine facilities. This is Peru LNG, the project I work for. It basically has three components: a natural gas pipeline that crosses the Andes to the coast. Actually, we have the Guinness record of the highest natural gas pipeline in the world. Then we go to Melchorita, that's the name of our plant, located 160 kilometers south of Lima, which is basically a gigantic fridge. Basically, gradually it turns down the temperature of gas until a point that it becomes liquid. And once liquid, through the marine facilities, we load large LNG ships, LNG vessels. So the main message here, the vision that we had, was how to implement such a large project trying to really taking care of the environment. Well, mitigation hierarchy, that's something simple to do it, looks simple. And it's composed of four main steps. The main step is avoidance, where you really try to avoid the impact. The second one is minimization. If you cannot avoid the impact, then you have to do something about it to try to minimize the impact. The third one is restoration, try to recover what you lost in terms of biodiversity, in terms of habitats. And the fourth one is compensation or additional conservation actions. This picture is before the project. So you can see here, this is the project, but the spot that was selected, this is just before construction, was selected after a very careful analysis of different alternatives. 4 sites were thoroughly assessed by a group of people from different backgrounds, from engineering, biology, science, to try to see where can we locate this project in order to minimize, to avoid the impact. And yes, this site was selected for 2 main reasons. First, the biodiversity value of this area of the marine environment was very low. And second, it had a cliff. And in Peru, we have earthquakes, so we have tsunamis. And this cliff provided us with some natural protection against tsunamis. So this picture, at least for us, it represents avoidance. Then minimization. Building a large infrastructure project is really interesting. And you can really harm the environment during construction. So if you follow the mitigation hierarchy and you have inserted in the engineering team, you have a team of biologists, people from conservation, from some different backgrounds. You know, if they work together, there are always ways to do the things like this, building a trestle, trying to minimize the impact. Maybe you can see that, you know, is as transparent as possible, the trestle, in terms of the transport of marine sediments, in terms of the waves, currents, and marine life can move from one side to the other. When we built the breakwater, it's an 800 long meter breakwater, 2 kilometers offshore. all those minimization plans were tested. Anything that we could do could really cause something bad for the environment. But you know, it paid off. All that thought was a direct hit. You can see in the picture. We were even still building it, and pelicans and incoterms and many other seabirds started to populate the structure. It was an amazing, amazing discovery. It became a trendy neighborhood for seabirds. And then this is operations, a picture for operations. And you know what? Yes, certainly the main impacts of a project are during construction. It's very intrusive. You hit hard on the environmental components, and then you have operations. The difference is that in operations, you are operating a project for 30, 40, 50 years. So you better think what you do in order to keep that concept of the mitigation hierarchy live within all your management plans. But we had the question of how do we know that this mitigation hierarchy is working? How can we know that we are really minimizing the impacts, that we are really avoiding or restoring? That's when we have a really interesting partnership with the Smithsonian. We approached them, we explained the problem that we were facing, and they certainly wanted to help us. We entered into a collaboration with them back in 2008 during construction days for a 3-year period. And you know what? The collaboration is still ongoing. It's fantastic. They basically design our monitoring program. The monitoring is so vital because it provides you precisely that, the vital signs of the marine environment or of all the habitats that we cross with our gas pipeline. They provide us with the right information, either good or bad, and with that, we engineers, we can really take those recommendations on board, tweak our management plans, adapt our minimization methods, and make them work. In this picture, you can see people from a Smithsonian team, technicians, they are collecting samples from bentos. They also help us with the marine monitoring regarding fish, regarding seabirds. And what is interesting is that we added a key component to it, which is stakeholder engagement. Nowadays, it is absolutely impossible to do a large project like this without a very robust and sound stakeholder engagement strategy. So, as part of the marine monitoring program, we included a participatory component, which is literally putting in the same boat people from fishermen, people from the surrounding communities, from NGOs, from universities, even from the governmental agencies, because there is nothing to hide. The more transparent the monitoring program is, the better for everybody. And that's the real value of having a partnership like that. I have taken you through a few slides here regarding the story, how we build it, how are we operating, and how are we monitoring it. We now have a colony of 600 penguins, Humboldt penguins, in that breakwater. 600 penguins and a population that is still growing. It's fantastic. And the partnership that we have is basically helping us to understand what can we do and what we shouldn't do in order to really take care of those penguins that are in the core of our marine operations. Finally, this picture represents science, represents conservation and engineering. It's a picture of a penguin nesting in our marine breakwater. It's a picture of the future. So the mitigation hierarchy never stops. And a partnership with an independent and scientific-based organization should accompany the process. Because then again, everybody's looking for sustainable development. Thank you very much.
So another amazing partnership story. We'll shift now from a partnership in the energy in the energy sector in Peru to a partnership involving not only conservation investment, but also in a part of the world that's even further remote. So it's my honor now to introduce Tom Butler, who is both an advocate and an author and talk about the work that they're doing to conserve vast landscapes. So, Tom.
See, I'll go back to that. When you hear the word Patagonia, what do you think? Puffy jackets? Folks who look like they should be hanging off a cliff somewhere? Is that what you think? Or do you think of that wind-scoured region at the bottom of South America? And if you've been to Patagonia, the place, and experienced its wild beauty, its splendor and extraordinary character in person, you know what I'm talking about, and I'm sure you have a story to tell. And I do too. And I very much wish it was about a grand and epic adventure, maybe something like the one experienced by my late boss, Douglas Tompkins, who was part of the expedition in 1968 to Fitzroy. And you can see Doug Tompkins there with his buddy Yvon Chouinard, who went to go on and have a little clothing company he started up with a logo that has Fitzroy on it. And they and three other buddies spent 5 weeks hanging out in snow caves, waiting for the weather to clear before they reached the summit. But my story of Patagonia is far more prosaic, and I think that's okay. Actually, I think it's good that regular people like me and like you that maybe aren't going to hang out on vertical cliffs, we too can have deeply influential experiences in untrammeled landscapes. Untrammeled landscapes, places of beauty and integrity and wildness. Places that are characteristic of the way all the world used to be. And maybe could be again, if our conservation movement becomes more bold and more effective. So, once upon a time, not too long ago, I was hanging out here in the Chacabuco Valley of southern Chile. My hiking companions at the time were all very accomplished nature photographers, so for some reason they wanted to take pictures of that, which I benefit from. And I had most of the afternoon to myself, a time of silence and solitude with only the sound of the wind and bird song, hiking through these grasslands that are teeming with guanacos and crossing through little patches of forest, which are strongholds of the endangered huemul, or South Andean deer. And then as dusk neared, the group reassembled and we threw our sleeping bags down on the ground, and this is what appeared, this sky overhead. It was incredible because there was not another person or another human structure for many miles. And it was exciting to be in that place under that extraordinary skyscape, but it was also exciting because we happened to have thrown our sleeping bags down on the ground in a place that is occupied by mountain lions. And mountain lions are that region's top predator, and they're vitally important to healthy ecosystems, of course. And my scientist colleagues within Tompkins Conservation have been conducting a long-running study of the interactions between mountain lions and huemuls so that specifically we can know whether the healthy population of large cats is negatively affecting the imperiled population of deer. So I've seen the data. I know what they eat, and they don't eat middle-aged hikers from Vermont. I know that intellectually, but viscerally, when you lay your sleeping bag down on the ground and the sun starts to go down and the shadows lengthen and you realize that maybe there is a mountain lion haunting those shadows, it gives you pause. But it also is the essence of a wilderness experience, a place to be where the land is self-willed, where it is not yoked to human desires to manipulate and control and extract. A land that is home to self-willed creatures, even creatures that maybe we find threatening, but that are left free to flourish in their own ways. So it was really a pleasure to be in that place and get through the night and then see the sunrise, that sunrise on San Lorenzo, to awake to that view. So what did I experience? Scenic splendor, muscle-powered recreation, the companionship of friends, abundant wildlife, all the values associated with national parks, going back some 150 years. And where exactly was I? I was in the future Patagonia National Park, which will forever be available to you and to your children and to all the people of the earth to experience these same qualities due to this recent agreement between Tompkins Conservation and the Chilean government. On March 15th of this year, Christine Tompkins, who heads Tompkins Conservation there with Chilean President Michelle Bachelet, announced, and they were in Pumalín Park, our other flagship park project, a bit farther to the north in the Chacabuco Valley. And there they gathered to announce the largest ever expansion of a national park system on Earth, prompted by the donation of private land. In specifics, Tompkins Conservation pledged to give away essentially all of our privately assembled conservation lands in Chile, roughly 1 million acres, and all of the public access infrastructure that we have created at Pumalín Park and Patagonia Parks. And in turn, the government will be chipping in about 9 million acres, upgrading some existing national reserves and adding some other government lands to the package. In sum, creating 5 new national parks and expanding 3 existing national parks and adding more than 10 million acres to Chile's national park system. Now, one of the key goals of this project is to establish this so-called route of parks. This route of parks vision would cover 17 national parks between Piedmont and the Beagle Channel. And we envision this as an absolutely powerful tool for regional economic transformation, as this becomes a globally known destination for adventure tourism, and we see local economies benefit as a consequence of wilderness protection. Now, this landmark deal that was just announced builds on a legacy going back some 25 years. Doug and Chris Tompkins, after leaving very successful careers in the corporate world, turned their talents to saving nature. And even before this deal, Tompkins conservation efforts have already helped establish 6 new national parks in Chile and Argentina. And that park-making work is complemented by probably the most ambitious program of rewilding in the Americas, where my colleagues in the Iberá marshlands region of northern Argentina have already reintroduced various extirpated species, including giant anteaters, pampas deer, green-winged macaws, collared peccaries, tapirs, and other species, and we're now working to captive breed jaguars for eventual return into the future Iberá National Park. So why focus on creating and rewilding national parks? Well, because they are the oldest, the most durable, and the most loved tool for permanently protecting natural areas, as well as introducing people to the integrity and beauty and wildness of healthy landscapes. And buying land and donating it for public natural areas is not a new idea. The very first national park in Argentina is the result of a gift of private land to the state from Perito Moreno back in 1903. The first national park in Ireland was a gift of private philanthropy. Iconic parks, Muir Woods, Grand Teton, Great Smoky Mountains, Virgin Islands National Park, many others, all either created or expanded from private philanthropy. And even in Chile, the kind of most iconic park in that nation, Torres del Paine, also not a result, but expanded through private philanthropy when the Italian mountaineer Guido Manzino donated his private estancia to expand the park in the 1970s. But this Tompkins and Bachelet government agreement, along with these earlier examples of national park creation that have been executed by Tompkins Conservation in the past, with 4 different presidents of different political persuasions, I think really shows the power of public-private collaboration in this particular moment, when these challenges before us are so bold and so grave and demand bold thinking. And by creating big, wild national parks and demonstrating organic farming and ranching practices outside those protected areas, helping to buffer them with sustainable agricultural use, Chris and Doug Tompkins and the Tompkins Conservation Team have offered the world a model for an engaged entrepreneurial philanthropy at an unprecedented scale. Now, we are engaged in this work for all the values that have been articulated through conservation history about protected areas. Experiential, utilitarian, economic, ecological, evolutionary, we get all those. But part of the reason why it's so fun to be part of the Tompkins conservation team is to say this. And here, I'm going to be very clear about something. We do this work not only to benefit local communities in southern Chile. We do this because fundamentally we believe wild places and wild creatures exist for their own sake. That is the ultimate argument for conservation, that these creatures exist on their own, they have intrinsic value, they do not require us to value them. And here I'm going to step aside from optimism for just a moment and have a little pessimistic snark. When we heard in the plenary session this morning a representative of an international conservation organization say, we do not protect nature for its own sake, we do it for people, a perfectly repugnant statement, and my mouth hit the ground as my jaw dropped. I was shocked, and I'm pleased to say we do protect nature for its own sake, as well as for the sake of human economies and human welfare. Because we have an ethical obligation to be good neighbors in the community of life. If we take seriously this idea that Aldo Leopold articulated about the evolutionary odyssey, we know that we are not just metaphorical relatives to our wild kin. We are literally related. My daughter here is with her cousins, either nearer or more distantly related. So, can national parks alone save the world? No, maybe not. But this evolving national park idea, as it embodies this notion of a commitment to be good neighbors in the community of life, is a crucial component of planetary healing. Individually, we know protected areas, national parks and other protected areas protect habitats, sustain ecological and evolutionary processes, sequester carbon, mitigate climate chaos, help local economies. We know all those things. And we know that collectively, if we think boldly enough, national parks and marine parks can be the anchors of interconnected systems of conservation lands that ultimately ring at least half the Earth, and that can eventually slow and stop the global extinction crisis. And personally, when we visit them, when we experience national parks and other wild places, we know that they offer an invitation to us personally to help rewild ourselves as well as the Earth. They help rebut old narratives about dominion and control. And they offer a new story about communion and reciprocity. They're a place to remember our deepest longings for kinship and communion and connection. And in this deeply troubled world, public-private partnerships to expand national parks, driven by both passionate advocacy and innovative philanthropy, are a crucial means to achieving that future we seek, a future characterized by beauty, integrity, wildness, with freedom and habitat for all. Thank you.
Amazing story, amazing storyteller about an amazing project, an amazing partnership. I don't think I could use the word amazing too many times when you hear that great story. We go from a place that's as wild as any place on Earth. By the way, I loved your reference to E.O. Wilson's Half Earth, that we do need to return, probably for the health of our planet, half the planet back to a wild state to maintain its health. Our next speaker goes from the wilds to a heavily populated Northern Virginia, where we talk about how we can maintain an ecological balance through partnerships that we're working. It's my honor to introduce Chris Miller, who's the president of the Piedmont Environmental Council, to talk about work that's going on right here to save our species. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
I don't know about you guys, but I'm totally intimidated. we are at the other end of the scale. We're sort of your backyard land trust, and part of a group of organizations across the United States that are working in communities and at the local scale to try to be part of that 50%. We're trying to figure out how you work back towards wildness from a state of development, you know, sometimes urban, but often sort of halfway. So I'm going to show you a few things. I can't do this in less than 40 minutes, so this is a very truncated version. Piedmont Environmental Council, the land trust, works in 9 counties in the Virginia Piedmont. It's a multi-generational effort. This is a landscape that's owned by private citizens in a state that was created as a mercantile colony to exploit land and resources, and we believe in property rights. This is a community that voted 70% for Donald Trump. And thinks that climate change is not that important. 4% of the population, when we polled them in September, thought that climate change was an issue of importance. So that's who we work with. But with these people, and across a lot of issues, we've done incredible partnerships around conservation. So even in that challenging political and sociological reality, a lot of good is possible, and that's why I'm still optimistic. These are a class of college students we train every summer. We bring them in as smart juniors and seniors from across colleges in the United States and try to re-educate them because they haven't learned a thing. What percentage of those kids have paid taxes? What do you think? Less than 10% of them have ever filed a tax return. None of them knows what a deed is. None of them can conceive of what a mortgage is. And so they don't understand the drivers for most decisions that are made by local governments who are in fact, along with private citizens, are the ones who make most of the decisions that determine environmental quality. So we have these really brilliant conservationists who know nothing. And so we start them over. And it's not that they don't care. They care a lot. They can sit and see beautiful landscapes and be impassioned, but they have to learn more about how decisions and communities make decisions. So first things first, what's the Piedmont? We have to teach them a little bit about where we are, what our geology is. We don't work in that entire foothills of the Blue Ridge and the Alleghenies, but we are in this landscape of highly eroded ancient mountains, lots of fractures and no giant aquifers. We've got little pockets of water and lots of complications. This is our little piece. You're here. We're out there. We're about 50 miles from one of the fastest growing metropolitan areas in North America. So it's a challenging environment to be doing 50% conservation. We're known for our cattle. We raise really good grass-fed beef. Beautiful views. The Blue Ridge Mountains are very, very famous in American cultural landscape. The Shenandoah National Park, one of our first national parks, condemned by the state from private citizens. And one of our projects is to work with the communities of families that were driven out of the park, many of whom were never compensated. Think about that. And they still live there. It's only 2, 3, 4 generations away. There are relatives who remember being taken out of the park. And so that's part of our landscape that we have to work with. The Appalachian National Scenic Trail, one of the great tools for bringing people to nature, and we have some of the most heavily traveled portions of it. Great history. This is the landscape that inspired Jefferson and Madison to write the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. So a great sense of social justice and liberty. Obviously, some things we're still working on, but basic concept of participatory democracy and a place where change can happen. A place of great conflict and of great passion. We have many of the Civil War battlefields from the American Civil War where literally hundreds of thousands of people died and many were buried. So it's a place of great emotion. And it's also a great place with a great and vibrant agricultural economy. And traditionally a commodity exporter, and one of our biggest struggles is creating local and regional food networks, because almost all of the food produced in Virginia through history was exported out of the state. We have great waters. that rise from the mountains and provide habitat for our charismatic megafauna, the northern brook trout. That's it. That's all I got. It's 8 inches long. It's really beautiful, but it's not an oryx. It's not a happy penguin. So I apologize, but drinking water for millions of people, and again, in a very fast-growing area. So what's our role in this? We have to continually educate, generation by generation, a population that's growing that now represents 140 different countries. I mean, our public schools teach English as a second language to 30 different languages. So this is a very complex and increasingly diverse community. The first challenge is to engage them. Now, for your average 7th generation Virginia farmer, conserving a Civil War battlefield is pretty straightforward. It's where their ancestors fought and died. But explaining that from someone who came from Sudan is a little different. It's not quite as a direct connection. And so, finding points of engagement is the thing. And so what we try to do is find as many as possible. The multiplicity of points of entry to our organization, and which is why we work on almost every issue, from energy and transportation all the way through habitat restoration and wildlife preservation. Education is continuous. What's so interesting is to realize that every generation knows nothing when they start. We know that with our own kids. You sort of see them go from 0 to this amazing point where they pass you at about 16. But that reminder every summer with the college students that they really don't know anything about local government is a rude reminder of how important this is. Every time we elect a new board of supervisors at our local county council, we got to go back to square one. What is a watershed? Why is it important? Where does your drinking water come from? 75% of Americans have no idea, right? So that idea of education is not a one-time thing where, yep, we did it, it's done, we can move on to the next thing. It's something you have to build in as a recurring thing. And then this last thing, empowerment. How can we give people things to do they can do directly, right? It's great to talk about policy. It's great to have billionaires give parks. But we have millions of people that need to be able to do smaller and more concrete things so they too feel like they own that solution. Again, around a broad set of issues and working with literally thousands of people, but also hundreds of organizations around all those issues. So I'm going to zoom in on 2 things where I think you might find something you can take away. Around land conservation, again, we're a land trust. We're part of the Land Trust Alliance. We're accredited. We know how to do conservation easements and complex deals and all that stuff. But what does that add up to? Well, here's our landscape in that went very quickly. You can see it filling in. That's literally thousands of people taking the decision to permanently restrict their largest asset with a permanent deed restriction that limits subdivision and ensures conservation of important conservation values. If you think about that as a public-private partnership, it is amazing. It represents about $4 billion in private wealth that's been given up, and it is a ongoing endeavor. We do about 100 easements a year, working from a pool of about 1,000 of people who show interest. And again, that's something that's going forward. Our goal is 1 million acres out of a 2 million acre landscape, which is what? 50%. And it's all buffers to the national park. In fact, it's the view shed. It's the beautiful views that you see from the national park. The views you see are not actually the national park land. And that's true for the Appalachian Trail as well. Those brown spots are historic districts because we found that identifying with cultural landscape is as important as anything else. These easements really add up. When you aggregate them, this was done by my GIS team, pretty cool, it's double the size of the park itself. So that's pretty amazing. And 2 generations with thousands of partners protecting twice as much land as was condemned without compensation 75 years earlier. So that's a real success story. And it's important stuff. It's riparian buffers on 1,600 miles of streams and rivers, and all those the data points. You know, 30,000 acres of Civil War battlefields, that's just an amazing concentration of American history. And it's not inconsistent with the long-term community visions for growth. This is sort of the correspondence between our growth areas and the conservation areas in a very broad way. This is Dulles Airport. This is Eastern Loudoun, which is growing at about between 5 and 12% per year in its population. So this is not going on in a landscape where nothing's going on. Now, out here, you have what we call hollers, that haven't changed much in 200 years. And that's all in a transect of about 40 miles. So pretty neat landscape. And in the night sky, it's pretty stark. The places where there's growth, you see the lights. The places that are conserved that are dark. So it's a good measure, I think, of success. And that's a result of partnership, again, between this community of private landowners who have said this is what we want, and local governments that are working with them, state and federal governments that help with that as well. This isn't going to show up as well because of the film. But when you look at it from aerial views, the counties where there's a strong civic movement for conservation and where there's not, it really shows up. This projector isn't bright enough to show it. So what does this all have to do with partnership? Every one of these things takes ongoing work at the local, regional, state, national, and global level. We're always trying to find new ways to bring new people in, new resources, because none of it would happen one by one by one. It all relies on this sort of sense of mutual trust. Go back to those easements. You can't get one unless you believe your neighbor will ultimately do one. And what is the funniest thing to watch is sort of what we call the relentless incrementalism of conservation, where the neighborhood starts to peer pressure itself, right? And we think the tipping point is very much like it is for most social change movements, about 15%. When the early adopters become 10, 15% of the land or the landowners, then it becomes cool. And if you're not in, then you're not cool. And then you quickly go from 15% to 20, 30, 40, 50%. Actually, in the rural areas, we're looking for something closer to 70%. And that's when we know we'll have success, and we don't think we're that far away. So again, the brook trout, part of a big set of watersheds, the Chesapeake, the Rappahannock River. And what we're trying to do here is extend the cold water habitat we've recreated with the Shenandoah National Park, which was all pasture. It's all bare pasture when it was formed, and now is 75, 80 years of timber. And bring that down further, create connectivity, extend habitat. And one of the things we identified were stream crossings that were blocking the migration of this giant fish. We had to go out and assess it. We had all these partners. We had to give it the third-party credibility, get the landowners to let us on site. But it's things like this. And there are about 150 of them. And we got to get them out, and then we got to replace them with something better. And that takes time and lots of partners, 2.5 years. All the Fish and Wildlife Service people had maternity leave in between. It was amazing what can slow you down. But then it happens. And you release that water behind that dam that was a road that someone didn't really think through the first time. Everybody's happy. They smile. The trout are happy. The people are happy. And the park is effectively expanded. And so that's one thing that we really think is the takeaway. People really love where they live. That same poll that showed only 4% of the people were worried about climate change showed that 75% thought that quality of life was what was important to them the most. More than taxes, more than schools, more than crime, it was quality of life. And if we can get them to understand what they can do to improve quality of life, whatever the starting point is, they will build towards that 50%, that restoration of wildness, and create the places that we all think are important. And so that's why we're still optimistic, even though we live at the edge of this crazy place. Thank you.
What an amazing juxtaposition to go from wilds of Patagonia to the wilds of Northern Virginia with these fierce fish species, which I'm a big fan of, by the way. And it's appropriate that our last partnership and collaboration takes us back to Africa, where it all started again. So it's an amazing story that's going on in northern Kenya. And to have us tell that story today is Latif Boru, who is himself a sociologist and a linguist, but working in a community conservation program, which is just amazing. So Latif, would you take us through your story?
Good afternoon, everyone. I must say I'm very happy to be here. And this one day I've learned a lot and met a lot of lovely people. I think I want to thank the guys who organized for this. Very good job. I'm Latif. I work for Northern Rangelands Trust as head of governance and peace. Actually, it's the only place I've worked in. I went straight from campus, worked for Red Cross as a volunteer, and joined NRT. And I've never left. I don't think I'm leaving. I want to talk about the story of NRT and conservancies. And I want to talk about partnerships from the community's point of view. How are these partnerships impacting on the communities? And how are communities using these partnerships to better their own lives so that we get the other side of the story? So I'll talk about NRT briefly and what NRT is. NRT started in 2005. I'll talk about it later. But this is the space that we operate in as NRT. We cover about 10 counties, about 5 million acres of land. And it's a space that holds about 15% of the rhino population in Kenya. The same space holds about 60% of the grave zebra population in Kenya. We host over 90% of the world's hirola population. We also host about 10% of the elephant population in Kenya. And this is all community land. All those figures are in community land. And we also have a different species in our land that a lot of animals don't know anything about. The people. We have about 16 ethnic groups in northern Kenya, very colorful people. The butterfly nation, the Samburus, the Maasais that are very well known. And then we have the Rendiles, the Boranas, like me, I'm a Borana, little known communities of the Ndorobos, the Somalis, Turkanas. And these people are all pastoralists. They have this adopted traditional economy that's pastoralism that has been in a steady decline for a lot of reasons. I won't say including climate change because I'm in America. So, but anyway, they're very comfortable, but the problem starts when young men like me wants to get married in northern Kenya. When there's a guy who wants to get married in northern Kenya, then some cows have to be stolen. And this is one of the biggest problems that we're facing. One of the biggest challenges that communities face is conflicts with each other because of cattle rustling. And you want to get married, you go steal some cows, take to the father of the lady, and you get the lady. And that's how it is, yeah? So, but the other challenges that they have is years of political marginalization. The northern Kenya has history of marginalization from successive governments. Rangeland degradation, among many other challenges. So I talked about the traditionally adapted economy that is pastoralism. You can look at the land. And briefly, I'll just mention that almost 75% of the land is degraded in northern Kenya. And in fact, 10% of the erosion occurred in the last 10 years. But it's an optimism summit. I want to tell you a story of people trying to change all that, of people trying to overcome challenges through partnerships, and people driving this process so that it's not driven by NRT, it's not driven by other organizations, big organizations, but it's driven by the people themselves. So where did this all start? It all started in a very special conservancy, and a lot of people who are close to that conservancy, Lewa, are present here. So Lewa experimented with the idea of community conservancies in the 1990s in northern Kenya. They supported two conservancies, one called in Ngoisi in Laikipia, and another one called Namnyak in Samburu. So based on the model that Lewa is right now, they supported those communities, and they really did well. They started tourism. And people noticed that these Samburus and Maasais from these two conservancies do not move anywhere. They're able to take care of their livestock throughout the year in their land. But the rest of the people moved. Every 3 months you had to move to look for grass. You had to move because of conflict. But these two people never moved. And so they started asking questions. Why are you not moving? What's going on in your land? And people realized, oh, well, these guys have a plan. Oh, these guys have some structure that is governing natural resource management, that is governing sharing of resources. So they all went to Lewa and said, hey, we want to start something like this. So it became 3, it became 4, 5, 6, 7. And Lewa was overwhelmed. Lewa was a private organization at that time. And it couldn't handle the pressure of demand. And so Lewa worked with those conservancies that was existing at that time to form what is now NRT in 2005. So NRT started in 2005, some conservancies that are older than 20 years at that time. And NRT, from 2 conservancies in 1995, we've grown to about 33 conservancies, covering a total of 5 million acres. And you can see the pictures from northern Kenya all the way to some conservancies down at the coast. And why conservancies? Why start conservancies? Well, conservancies, the community have come together with partners to build institutions. The communities in northern Kenya have their own systems, but have eroded. The elders, the Moran system. How do we now build those institutions? And the main goal here is to gain the best from the past using modern tools. So things like accountability, doing AGMs, people don't know those things, audits. So we try to bring those things into their system of governance that is led by elders, but we try to improve participation of women and youth. And that's really the core of what I do, try to build governance, trying to build those institutional structures within community conservancies. And very important, as I mentioned, all the challenges is conflict. Through these structures that have been created, through these youth councils, through these boards of conservancies, what we've been able to do, or what the conservancies have been able to do, is to create a platform where they dialogue, where they are able to solve conflict, where if someone wants to get married, they decide, kindly find some cow somewhere else, and they have that platform to discuss this. So we've been able to really, and this is one of the biggest achievements I would say communities conservancies have had, is that they've provided a platform for them to discuss among themselves and solve conflicts amicably. And the other thing is protecting wildlife. I'm sure you're all aware that over 75% of wildlife in Kenya are outside protected areas in community lands. And these people have been living with wildlife, but what we've done is we've tried to innovate some tools like monitoring systems that are simple, that are able to be run by communities themselves. And we try to make it as simple as possible where they can use it to make management decisions. And that guy is a scout, has been trained by Kenya Wildlife Service, the national government body that is in charge of wildlife management. He's also been armed by the Kenya police, and they get all the ammunition from the Kenya police. And NRT, we've tried to come up with that monitoring system that they run themselves. So he goes around every day collecting data, and at the end of the day, or at the end of the month, the board questions why there's reduction in elephant sightings, why there's increase in human-wildlife conflict. And so what does this mean? So they sit together and discuss, and NRT and other partners, we are there to kind of break it down for them. And this other graph shows the proportion of illegally killed elephants. You can see from 2012, it was at 81%. It was the highest, but it's been on steady decline. In 2015, it was 38%. In 2016, is 18%. So this is all the work that is done by communities themselves. And again, to support the pastoralist economy, most important thing is grass. And as I mentioned, there's been a lot of degradation, and we want to regain the best from the past through modern innovations. And so these are a couple of women who are doing seed harvesting, something new. We never looked at grasses. I was a herds boy back 50 years ago. But during that time, grass is just grass. It's nothing. It's not a plant. But we're changing the mind shift to think of grass as, people have tobacco, people have coffee in central Kenya. But what we have in northern Kenya is grass. And we have to think as grass as coffee. We have to think as grass as our pyrethrum or as our rose flower. And so this is the mind shift that we bring into communities. And we have very simple management tools. We're using traditional systems of maintaining the rangeland, traditional systems of planning grazing. But what we've brought is the modern innovations of can you map that out? And can you use your governance institutions to really strengthen that make sure that those plans are being followed? So this is the thinking that is happening. And this communication, these conversations are happening within the communities. And it's very encouraging to hear our women who've never gone to school talk about climate change. And our women think, they take care of livestock. So they say, we used to graze 5 kilometers from our village and come back by 2. But now we have to go like 40 kilometers. Our Morans have to go out throughout the year. There are Morans who go out throughout the year and never come back home looking for grass. So these are discussions that they're starting to talk about. And things like bunching, things like monitoring systems of the vegetation, the land cover, and we've partnered with various organizations, including ILRI. ILRI is bringing the science part of it on board. We have the Impala Research Institute, the Severy Institute here of Holistic Management. We also have Grievy Zebra Trust, which is an organization in northern Kenya that's the lead on rangeland management. So these are the partnerships that communities are using to get the information and make management decisions on their land. This is one of the community projects that was done on healing the land. And it's just a demonstration site to show on this picture, this lager, we call it a lager. The erosion there is about 5 feet, but it's grown. So things are very simple tools like gully healing, and then we try to do it on a large scale on the land. Another important thing is how do communities have given up their land to do conservation, and so what's in it for them? How do they then break even? So a very, very big part of what NRT does is to grow community income. And there are various streams of community income that is in northern Kenya. Biggest is tourism. And if you look at the figures, tourism has been growing. It just slightly dropped in 2015, but averagely it's been on the rise. But if you look at the national index, it's been on a slump. So the conservancies are doing something different from what the governments are doing, and we are not sure what we are doing differently, but at least the guys who visit us know what's happening there. But another stream that is really coming up is livestock sales. We have a program called Livestock to Market Program, which is really what the Morans, or the youth, we call them Morans, know how to do well. So instead of bringing new ideas, we're trying to promote what they do well and try to bring money out of it. And why do all this? And what's the beauty of all this? The beauty of all this is that this is our land, and we live in this land, and it affects everyone. But if the communities are not able to do this themselves, we'll always create a syndrome that conservation has to be run by people from outside. And I just want to say that conservation will work if it's owned by the people. They own the land. They know the land better than anyone else. They just need a partner who comes on board and tries to, facilitate, bring some new innovations, but that a system that is adapted to their way of life. not introducing new things, trying to bring a system that's adaptable to their way of life, but ultimately improving their livelihoods. So that is the vision of NRT, having conservancies, community conservancies that transform life through securing peace, through conservation, and through growing their enterprise. And what we have then is we transform lives and secure a future for wildlife in a connected landscape. Large tracts of land where there's beautiful people and there's beautiful wildlife. Thank you.
I would also put in a plug for what my good friend Ambassador Andy Young says. Before you send a dime or a check to Africa or Kenya or Patagonia, go there. And then I would encourage you to go to Laowa, go to the Northern Rangelands Trust, go to Patagonia, go to these places to see it. Another round of applause for our great speakers. This is amazing. We're a little over time, but have time for about 2 questions or comments from the audience before you take your tea break, before the last plenary session. A comment? A question? Yes.
Yeah, sure. Hi. This is Eric from mangabay.com. We're a global conservation news site. And we reported on the reintroduction of the oryx to Chad a couple months ago. And I wanted to just hear how that is going. Because as we reported at the time, you were going to actually release them in August. Is that right? And is the number like still like 39 or something like that? How many are going to be releasing?
Come on up to the speaker. Or Steve, you want to help with that?
We have now over 75 oryx in Chad. 50 release, plus the newborn, and 25, or actually 22, 23, which are still in the pre-release pen. These one will be released in August. So you will have in August 75 oryx in the wild. Plus in August we are bringing probably more there. The purpose is the aim is to bring 500 to be released in Chad within the next 5 years. But now we've got 50 reintroduced in the wild, not in the fence area, plus the calf, and already 25 in the prairie span.
Great. Thank you.
Another question, comment? Any follow-up from our speakers? Well, thank you very much. It's time for a quick coffee break and then our final plenary session today. Thank you again very much.